I want to start by thanking my aunt for getting me Abundance for my birthday. When she got it for me, she said she'd like to hear my thoughts on it, which was really nice of her because I had some. Abundance is written by Ezra Klein and Derik Thompson. Ezra Klein is the co-founder of Vox and a New York Times columnist. This also isn't my first exposure to him. I remember seeing him on The Daily Show back in 2020 and reading his first book, Why We're Polarized, during the pandemic. Derik Thompson is a staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of Hitmakers and On Work. Admittedly, I am less familiar with his work. Abundance is primarily about innovation and the bottlenecks in the way. It focuses on political and private interest groups that create systemic challenges to build housing, develop medicine, create green energy, and AI. I'll be doing my best Ezra Klein impression. In their words, quote, "This book is dedicated to a simple idea. To have the future we want, we need to build and invent more of what we need. That's it. That's the thesis. It reads even to us as too simple, and yet the story of America in the 21st century is the story of chosen scarcities. Recognizing that these scarcities are chosen, that we could choose otherwise, is thrilling. Confronting the reasons we choose otherwise is maddening." Unfortunately, confronting why we choose otherwise doesn't really occur in this book, but before I dig into the critique, I want to praise the positive aspects of Abundance. It's well written and easy to read. It does that thing that most nonfiction does by telling stories that relate to the overall point of the chapter. Narratives are always more engaging than plain facts, so it's good at maintaining attention. The research is clearly well done. Words of people working in the relevant sectors are quoted, and attention is brought to the long-standing problems they face. Overall, I'd say I agree with most of the book's expressed purpose and even some of its solutions. However, there's something missing. There's some kind of unmentioned thread that ties all the problems in the book together, although the book says, quote, "There are rhymes that we have found across these challenges, echoes across these problems, but they are not unified enough to yield a single set of answers," end quote. That sounds true, although the problems in the book proliferate in a distinct environment, made and maintained by sets of economic interests that benefit some to the detriment of others. What the hell is water? You may already be familiar with David Foster Wallace's allegory, This is Water, describing two young fish that pass by an old fish. The older fish says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on, and one says to the other, "What the hell is water?" This allegory is meant to illustrate how easy it is to overlook the most important things that surround us. It's easy to overlook the core aspects of environment when in it, and it's hard to imagine it any other way. The book begins by imagining a utopian future of a peaceful life with subsistence technology. Quote, "Across the economy, the combination of artificial intelligence, labor rights, and economic reforms have reduced poverty and shortened the work week. Thanks to higher productivity from AI, most people can complete what used to be a full week of work in a few days, which has extended the number of holidays, long weekends, and vacations. Less work has not meant less pay. AI is built on the collective knowledge of humanity, and so its profits are shared," end quote. Okay, the claim that AI is going to increase productivity is likely true, but there's a problem. How will it shorten working hours? Work isn't really a thing that needs a specific amount done and is finished. When computers came out, people thought they'd shorten the work week by working faster, but instead the work week stayed the same, but more got done sooner. Time off didn't increase, expectations did. My mom actually gave me a great example of this. When new kitchen appliances like dishwashers and microwaves came out to make housework easier for housewives, they didn't get more time to relax. Instead, they were expected to get careers. Expectations changed with the new technology. The claim less work has not meant less pay is dubious. There is a correlation between the decline of unions and the stagnation of wages. It's because When workers collectively bargain, they can guarantee livable wages, and since their wages go up, other jobs need to become competitive to attract labor, so all wages go up too. In the ideal world abundance describes, where human labor is less needed, its value will likely go down, and they'll likely be paid less and have less bargaining power since there'd be lots of unemployed people who could easily replace the few employed laborers. So the pay probably wouldn't be great. I knew I had to share this critique when I read the line, AI is built on the collective knowledge of humanity, and so its profits are shared. At this unrealistic expectation, I began to question if the book was sincere or profoundly naive. The writers either can't see the water around them or pretend not to notice, because in a world where capitalism exists as it does today, the profits will not be shared. When new textile machines were invented in England in the 19th century, many workers were let go and the owners of the machines made greater profits. This led to the Luddite Revolution. Led by Ned Ludd, the Luddites opposed technological developments because they didn't reap the benefits and only incurred loss of livelihood. In a capitalist society, new technologies increased profits for the owners of the machines. Abundance tepidly acknowledges Aaron Bastini's fully automated luxury communism about a post-work, post-scarcity world, stating, quote, "It is routine in politics to imagine a just present and work backwards to the social insurance programs that would get us there. It is equally important to imagine a just, even delightful future and work backwards to the technological advances that would hasten its arrival. Bastini's vision is bracing because it insists that those of us who believe in a fairer, gentler, more sustainable world have a stake in bringing forward the technologies that will make that world possible. That is a political question as much as a technological one. Those same technologies could become accelerators of inequalities and despair if they're not embedded in just policies and institutions. What Bastini sees is that the world we want requires more than redistribution. We aspire to more than parceling out the present." End quote. They acknowledge so briefly that technologies like AI could accelerate inequalities, but decide that's a political problem and not a core issue to dwell on. I mean, it seems obvious companies that own and develop AI will profit from their development, like the obsolete textile workers long ago. I doubt modern workers will see the profits generated by the machines that replace them. In a capitalist world, labor is essentially a tool. When laborers are replaced with faster and cheaper tools, the money saved is more profit for the owners of those tools. There is an economic interest to operate as efficiently as possible to maximize profits. Labor will be cut if it stands in the way of profit because the interest of the working class is irrelevant to profit accumulation. But I've recently learned that Ezra Klein doesn't believe in class conflict, and it shows. Class as a subject is almost completely omitted. Although Abundance rarely mentions the upper class, it does so in passing more than anything else. Quote, "Too many have bought into the perverse inversion of what the city should be. Cities are where wealth is created, not just where it is displayed. They are meant to be escalators into the middle class, not penthouses for the upper class, but through bad policy and worse politics, we are doing in the 21st century what we've so feared in the 19th. We are closing the American frontier," end quote. As you'll notice, the upper class isn't a contributing factor in the housing crisis in cities in this quote or even the rest of the book. There's no mention of tax cuts for the wealthy that free up disposable income for the upper class to invest in real estate, driving up prices. Legislation that prevents the construction of housing is discussed, but the blame is never going to be levied at the feet of wealthy homeowners that advocate for these policies that benefit them. Pages 42 and 43 note how boarding houses were eliminated to keep the poor away from well-to-do areas, which contributed to homelessness. Blame is levied at city planners and liberals who live in cities, but are functionally conservative in closing off the communities to outsiders. This is a major problem, but the book refuses to dig into the elitist attitudes that gatekeep housing. Class is the problem. Why are there housing codes that forbid multifamily housing? Because people in the area don't want cheap housing for poor people to live near them. They don't want housing prices to go down because housing is commodified. The book points out how hypocritical home-owning Democrats are, but doesn't address the unequal conditions that spawn these class dynamics in the first place. The goal shouldn't just be to make more housing so it's more affordable, but to eliminate the class dynamic by paying fair wages. If laborers reap the profits of their work, that wealth won't accumulate into an elevated upper class. If we can flatten this hierarchy, like in many Scandinavian countries, it would weaken the incentive to gatekeep housing. The book insists on eliminating the gatekeeping legislation without fully comprehending why we haven't done so already. It's maintained by a pervasive class dynamic. It'll be hard to change the law if the dynamic hasn't changed. In the section going over the issues that impede the building of rail, the wealthy are mentioned in passing, but this is probably the closest the book ever gets at class analysis. Quote, Siverson told a similar story. There are a million veto points, he said. There are a lot of mouths at a lot of troughs that need to be fed to get anything started or done. So many people can gum up the works. That's particularly true in richer areas. When richer residents want something stopped, they know how to organize, and they often already have the organizations, to say nothing of the lobbyists and access needed to stop it. End quote. Though admitting the wealthy impede the development of public transit, the book doesn't explain why. One reason is because wealthy people don't use public transit. The upper class have private means of transport, cars, helicopters, private jets. They don't have any need for high-speed rail. To them, it's a hideous big waste of time and money. Politicians that push public works projects still value the voices of the wealthy, a la Elon Musk and the California rail system. Wealthy people like this are well-connected, they fund campaigns, and they swim in the same highly educated circles as politicians. So when legislation is crafted to impede unwanted construction, it's written to the benefit of those who need such utilities the least. A major issue Abundance alludes to is the dearth of paperwork necessary for the government to do anything. One of the aspects the book takes interest in is the spending of grant money. I'm not accusing the authors of being conservative for repealing legislation. Admittedly, the government has its hands tied in overcomplicated legislation that designates money in very specific ways without any flexibility. Quote, but just as environmental laws passed in response to 20th century problems created a crisis of building in the 21st century, the paperwork cure in science is something worse than the disease. Understandably, the implementation of legislation that binds up progress is a problem, and we could repeal executive red tape to alleviate it. But like John Doench mentioned in the earlier paragraph, why are we doing this? Because they're afraid I'm going to buy a Corvette with the grant money? End quote. As mentioned, there is a fear amongst an indistinct group of people that money will be wasted, and maybe it's just me, but I'd reckon that the working class people aren't demanding receipts from the government on a regular basis. There is, however, another class who's very eager to cut taxes and fickle about how every dime is spent. If I were to hazard a guess who advocates for receipts and grant request laws, it's probably those with the most money who don't trust the government to spend it correctly. This is where science meets capitalism. Only safe bets get funding as if they were stock investments. We're treating scientific research funding based on how promising it seems a return on investment will be. But if we do that, we're going to leave a lot of unexplored fields unexplored. Again, the book doesn't identify the roots of these issues. The authors want to repeal red tape but can't see the uphill battle they're facing. Wealthy people don't want the government to spend more money, and they don't want it to be easier to spend.